What happens when a species, underestimated and ignored for centuries, finally steps onto the battlefield? What if their arrival shifts the course of an intergalactic war in mere hours? This is the story of humanity's ultimate debut on the galactic stage. For years, Earth had been a quiet, isolated planet, largely ignored by the advanced civilizations that dominated the stars. The war had been raging for decades, an all-consuming conflict between alien species, each one more powerful than the last. They had fought in space, on distant worlds, and within the very heart of their empires. Yet, despite their endless battles, none of these alien factions had ever considered humanity a threat. Until now. The first sign of humanity's involvement came when the communication grid went quiet. For weeks, fleets from the alien coalition had been advancing toward a strategic planet, one that was of little interest to humanity at the time, but was of great importance to the war. And then, just as the battle was set to reach its most destructive stage, Earth's military forces made their first move. It wasn't much at first. A few small ships, easily dismissed by the alien commanders who had never once considered humanity a real player in the galactic game. But what they didn't realize was the true nature of humankind. For centuries, humanity had been watching from the shadows, observing the strategies, the tactics, the mistakes. They had no spacefaring experience, no intergalactic empires of their own. But what they had was something no alien species could ever predict: resilience, adaptability, and a burning desire to survive. It wasn't long before the aliens realized their error. In just 5 hours, humanity turned the tide. The first wave of human ships didn't stand a chance against the vast fleets of the alien forces, but their real strength lay in something far more lethal: their unrelenting ingenuity. With every battle lost, humanity learned. With every strategy that failed, they adapted. By the time the aliens had realized what was happening, it was already too late. Human forces had pushed them back, cutting off their supply lines, breaking their communications, and defeating their best generals. The shockwaves reverberated across the galaxy. The aliens were no longer the only ones who knew how to wage war. But just as the alien coalition began to retreat, a new threat emerged from the darkness of space, one that no one saw coming. The story was far from over, and the humans, for all their cunning and bravery, were about to face a challenge greater than they ever could have imagined. What had they truly unleashed by stepping into the war? Would they be able to maintain their newfound place in the stars, or had they just started something they could not control? Stay tuned. The aftermath of the humans' sudden appearance on the galactic battlefield left a ripple of chaos across the entire warfront. For centuries, the factions warring in the distant reaches of space had grown comfortable in their dominance. They knew the land, the tactics, the weapons, and above all, they knew their enemies. Their strategies had been honed over countless conflicts, and their empires had grown fat and complacent, believing their power to be unassailable. The notion of a species like humanity, a fledgling race with no spacefaring history, coming to challenge them had seemed laughable. They had made the grave mistake of underestimating the human spirit. When the first human ships arrived, their numbers were so few that the aliens didn't take notice. In the grand scheme of the war, a handful of human vessels meant nothing. But humans were never just about numbers. They were about will, and that will was something the galactic empires had never understood. Humanity's entrance into the war didn't begin with a grand fleet, nor with some superior technology that the aliens could not comprehend. It started with a single human vessel, a rickety, battered thing that had been cobbled together from salvaged parts. The ship was slow, outdated, and barely capable of interstellar travel, yet it carried a message that none of the alien fleets could ignore. Humans had arrived, and they were here to stay. The ship's commander, a seasoned veteran of Earth's military who had been conscripted into the war, was a quiet, reserved man. He had seen the carnage of countless battles, fought in wars that spanned decades, but he had never seen anything like the scale of this conflict. To him, The war in space was both an opportunity and a burden. Earth had been isolated for so long that the idea of joining something so far beyond their reach was a hard pill to swallow. But when the Federation of Alien Coalitions had taken their first strike against Earth, there was no choice but to respond. They had invaded Earth's closest colonies, destroyed research stations, and taken over critical resources. A ship he commanded had no advanced weaponry. There were no grand fleets of battleships. All they had was Earth's military experience and the unyielding desire to protect their people. In that moment, the commander didn't care about galactic politics or the alien alliances. He was driven by one simple goal: survival. The first human strike on the alien coalition was a gamble. Earth's fleet wasn't prepared for space combat on this scale, and they were vastly outgunned. Yet, the commander believed something the alien factions didn't: that humanity's greatest strength was in its adaptability. With every challenge, humans learned, adjusted, and pressed on. They didn't need superior technology to fight. They just needed to be faster, smarter, and more resourceful. The strategy was simple yet brilliant. The humans didn't fight in conventional ways. They didn't wait for the aliens to come to them. Instead, they exploited the alien fleet's overconfidence. They sabotaged supply lines, jammed communications, and launched small, precise raids on isolated targets. The alien forces, not used to such guerrilla tactics, were caught off guard. They weren't used to facing an enemy that didn't play by the rules. The war had been fought in the traditional ways for so long that when a new player arrived with unconventional tactics, it threw the entire balance off. The first major victory came when a group of human ships successfully attacked an alien outpost deep within enemy territory. The outpost, which was used to supply a large fleet with critical resources, was a prime target. The human ships, disguised as debris from destroyed vessels, infiltrated the outpost under the cover of a meteor shower. Once inside, they destroyed key infrastructure, supply routes, communication hubs, and weapons cages, all without ever being detected by the alien forces. It was a masterpiece of human ingenuity and stealth. The success of the mission sent shockwaves through the alien fleets. They didn't know how to deal with an enemy that could be so unpredictable. What happened next was beyond even the human commander's expectations. The alien coalition, having underestimated humanity, began to scramble. Alien commanders, who had once been confident in their superiority, now found themselves second-guessing their strategies. The human force, small and seemingly insignificant, had become a thorn in the side of the vast war machine that had been crushing everything in its path. With every alien advance, humanity had been right there, exploiting weaknesses, making their presence known. The turning point came when a human tactical team made an audacious move to capture a high-ranking alien officer. The capture itself was both a victory and a puzzle. The officer, a creature unlike anything the humans had ever seen, was known for his ruthless strategies. He had led the coalition's most successful campaigns, and his capture was seen as a major blow to the alien leadership. But what the humans didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the officer wasn't just an ordinary soldier. He was an emissary of a much larger, much darker force, one that had been quietly manipulating the war from the shadows. The officer, held captive on Earth's most secure military base, refused to speak at first. But the humans were patient. They had time, and they knew how to break even the most stubborn of adversaries. Over time, they managed to pry information from him, fragments of a much larger conspiracy. The alien coalition, as powerful as it was, had not been working alone. There were forces at play in the galaxy far beyond the war that the humans had stumbled into. Some of these forces had been watching Earth for centuries, waiting for the right moment to make their move. And when humans finally joined the war, they weren't just fighting to survive. They had become a key part of a much grander game, one that was far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. As the days passed, more ships arrived, human reinforcements that had been quietly preparing for this moment. But the more they fought, the more they realized that the enemy they were facing wasn't just the alien coalition. There was something else out there, something darker, something that had been pulling the strings all along. The mysterious force was not content with simply winning the war. It wanted something much more profound. Control over the galaxy itself, and the humans, with all their potential and untapped power, were the key to it all. The war, which had seemed like a simple clash of civilizations, was now turning into something far more complex. Earth was no longer just a target. It had become the fulcrum upon which the fate of the entire galaxy would pivot. The aliens, realizing the human race's potential, scrambled to form uneasy alliances with one another, but their alliances were fragile and their trust in each other was beginning to crack. The human commander, who had once been a mere soldier, was now something else entirely. He had become the symbol of a revolution, a leader who had not only brought humanity into the war, but had ignited a fire that could not be easily put out. With every battle, the stakes grew higher. The aliens had never imagined that a species so young could disrupt the delicate balance of power they had established over millennia. The mysterious force behind the scenes, however, was biding its time, watching as the humans and the alien factions fought one another. And then, just as the conflict seemed to reach a boiling point, something changed. There was a shift in the air, a sense of impending doom that could not be ignored. In the distance, a new threat loomed. It wasn't a fleet of ships, nor a wave of soldiers. It was something far more insidious, something the humans had never encountered before. The stars themselves seemed to dim, and the very fabric of space seemed to tremble as the new force made its move. But what was it? And how could humanity, who had only just begun to grasp their place in the war, possibly prepare for a threat like this? The humans had been fighting to survive, to prove they were worthy of the galaxy's respect. Now they were fighting for something far greater, the future of everything they held dear. What they didn't know was that their arrival in this war had set in motion a series of events that would alter the course of galactic history forever. And they were about to learn just how dangerous it could be when you finally get the attention of forces far beyond your comprehension. What would they do when they learned the true nature of the threat that awaited them? And more importantly, would humanity's brilliance, their relentless ingenuity, be enough to survive against an enemy that had been lurking in the shadows all along? Only time would tell. The galaxy had always been a place of order, an intricate web of alliances, treaties, and rivalries. But in the wake of humanity's involvement, the once stable systems were beginning to unravel. The war, which had been largely contained to the alien factions, was now spilling into chaos. With each victory, humanity had gained confidence, but they also attracted attention, both from their enemies and from forces far darker than they could imagine. The human commander, now a symbol of hope for his people, sat in the dimly lit briefing room, surrounded by his closest advisors. Their faces were grim. The most recent battle, a victory by all accounts, had come at a steep price. The enemy had begun adapting, countering the human tactics that had once caught them off guard. The alien forces, now fractured by suspicion and paranoia, were becoming unpredictable. Some factions, once rivals, had begun to form uneasy alliances, their focus now solely on neutralizing the human threat. The humans had sparked something, a fire in the galaxy that no one had anticipated. But it wasn't just the alien fleets that were of concern. The mysterious force, the one that had manipulated the war from the shadows, had begun to make itself known. Its influence was subtle at first, just strange signals detected at the edge of human space, cryptic messages that none could decipher. But then, those signals grew more frequent, more urgent, and with them came a sense of dread, as if the very fabric of space itself was starting to tear apart. On the human side, the more they tried to piece together the puzzle, the more it seemed like they were only pulling on loose threads. The mysterious officer, captured weeks ago, had been surprisingly cooperative, at least to an extent. He had spoken of his people, their history, and their goals, But his words only raised more questions than they answered. He had warned them about the coming storm, a force he called the Waking. But his warnings had been fragmented, his mind breaking under the strain of captivity. There was one thing, he said, that stuck with the commander, though. When they wake, nothing will be left standing. The human fleet, already stretched thin from constant engagement with the alien forces, was no longer able to keep up with the escalating threats on all sides. Supplies were dwindling, morale was faltering, and the pressure was mounting. The aliens had become desperate, launching more aggressive offensives. But it wasn't just their ships or their weapons that were a concern. It was the strange, otherworldly occurrences beginning to appear across human-held space. Entire ships had gone missing, vanished without a trace. Crews had reported seeing things they couldn't explain. Flickering shadows in the corners of their vision, whispers in the dark, and hallucinations so real they could feel them. Human scientists, working tirelessly to understand the phenomena, had found a terrifying pattern. The anomalies, which had once been sporadic, were now centered around one particular region of space, an area that had been avoided by most galactic powers for centuries. Known as the Shroud, it was a zone of space where even the most sophisticated navigational tools faltered, and where strange energy readings had always been detected but never properly explained. It was in this area that the signals from the Waking seemed to originate, and as the human fleet drew closer, the anomalies grew more intense. The commander knew they had to investigate. They had no choice. If humanity was to have any hope of surviving the coming storm, they needed to understand what they were facing. But every ship that entered the Shroud seemed to disappear. Messages went unanswered. Systems shut down without warning. There were whispers of entire fleets being consumed by something unseen, something ancient. The human fleet, now desperate for answers, prepared for what could very well be their final mission. As they approached the Shroud, the tension was palpable. Every officer, every crew member knew that they were entering unknown territory where even the most basic laws of physics seemed to break down. The commander could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had always led with the belief that human ingenuity could overcome any obstacle, but now even his confidence was beginning to waver. The first ship to enter the Shroud disappeared without a trace. A fleet of 4 human vessels, equipped with advanced sensors and communication arrays, slipped into the mysterious zone, their last transmissions nothing more than static and distorted words. The fleet had entered a region of space so strange that even the stars seemed to lose their meaning. Time itself felt distorted. What should have been a simple reconnaissance mission had turned into a nightmare. But it wasn't just the fleet that disappeared. The moment the ships crossed into the Shroud, an eerie silence descended over the human forces. The anomaly, whatever it was growing stronger. Even the alien fleets, once so confident in their superiority, had begun to retreat from the area, unsure of what force they were up against. But the humans, with no other choice, pressed on. Then the commander received a message. It was a transmission, sent from the heart of the Shroud. The voice on the other end was familiar, yet distorted, alien, yet human. It was a voice that had haunted his dreams for days. The officer they had captured, the one who had warned them of the Waking, was speaking again. But this time, his words were different. His tone had shifted from desperation to something colder, more detached. He wasn't just warning them anymore. He was inviting them. They are coming, the voice said, crackling with static. You cannot stop them. They are inevitable. The Waking is upon you. The transmission cut off, and the fleet's sensors went haywire. The crew scrambled to maintain contact, but nothing seemed to work. The Shroud was swallowing them whole, and with it the hope they had carried into this fight. The commander's heart raced as he realized that the enemy they had feared, the one they had only glimpsed in cryptic messages and distorted signals, was real, and it was coming for them. The Waking was not just a force of destruction. It was a presence, an intelligence older than the galaxy itself, one that had been lying dormant for millennia. And now, with humanity's arrival, it was stirring. The alien forces had known about it for centuries, but they had never dared to wake it. But the humans had ignited something they could not control. The fleet was running out of time. The commander ordered all ships to turn back, to leave the shroud and return to safer space. But it was too late. Something in the fabric of space itself was shifting. The stars dimmed, the very air around them seemed to thicken, and a presence, vast, incomprehensible, loomed over them. It wasn't a ship, nor an army. It was a force of pure entropy, a cosmic entity that had been waiting for its moment to emerge. The human fleet, isolated and cut off from the rest of the galaxy, now found itself surrounded by an invisible wall, a barrier that twisted the laws of physics themselves. Every attempt to escape, every plea for help, was met with silence. It was as if the universe itself had turned its back on them. As the commander stood at the helm of his flagship, staring out into the emptiness, he felt the weight of the galaxy bearing down on him. This was no longer a war between factions. It was a war for survival, against an enemy that had been waiting for millennia. And humanity, for all its ingenuity, for all its brilliance, was facing something far beyond their understanding. The question was no longer whether they could win. The question was whether they could survive at all. The waking was upon them, and they had no idea what horrors lay in wait. Would humanity's spirit, their unyielding will to survive, be enough to face an enemy that could reshape the very fabric of reality? Or had they already lost before the battle had even begun? And as the first flickers of the waking began to appear in the darkness of space, one thing became clear: this was only the beginning. The waking had begun, a presence so vast, so alien, that it seemed to stretch across time itself. The very space around the human fleet had contorted into a sickening, swirling mass, distorting light, sound, and even thought. But just as the commander was preparing to issue his final orders, an attempt to retreat into the depths of the shroud, to escape whatever unspeakable force now loomed over them, there was a sudden break in the chaos, a momentary flicker of clarity, a pulse in the dark. At first, the commander thought it was just another distortion, another fragment of a malfunctioning sensor. But then he saw it, a figure, faint and wavering, appearing in the shimmering space before them. It was like a shadow in the void, a silhouette without substance. It didn't belong in the universe, and yet it was there. The crew watched in horror as the figure solidified, revealing something that defied every understanding of life. The form was humanoid, but far too tall, its skin a pale, translucent gray, shifting like liquid. Its eyes were enormous, hollow, and filled with an endless void. It stood before them, hovering, without a ship or any sign of propulsion, as though it were simply part of the fabric of space itself. The sensation it brought was one of immense cold, a profound loneliness that seemed to seep into the very bones of every human aboard the fleet. The commander's heart raced. He'd seen many strange things throughout his life, but nothing could have prepared him for this being, or whatever it was. It wasn't alien in the way they had come to understand alien life. It wasn't even alive, not in the traditional sense. It was something else. And then, as if reading his thoughts, the figure spoke, its voice not through words, but directly into the minds of the humans aboard. It was a voice that filled their heads, a cacophony of whispers, ancient and infinite, reverberating with a power that made their skin crawl. "You think you understand this war?" the voice boomed. "You think you control your fate? You have only just begun to glimpse what lies beyond. You are not the first to awaken the waking. You are not the first to think yourselves masters of your own destiny." The commander froze. The crew was silent, terrified, all eyes fixed on the spectral entity in front of them. No one could comprehend what was happening. What had they unleashed by stepping into this war? Had their struggle for survival, their fight for freedom, led them directly into the path of something far worse? The figure's form shimmered, then distorted, and before anyone could react, it was gone. The waking returned, stronger than before, as if in response to the encounter. Space around the human fleet seemed to fold inward, and for a moment, it felt like the universe itself was collapsing. The lights on the ship flickered, then died. The monitors went blank, and the sound of the engines sputtered and cut off entirely. Silence consumed them. But then, just as the crew began to panic, the signal returned. It wasn't a message. It was a vision, projected into their minds. The commander saw it first. A vast, endless expanse of black. In the distance, floating among the stars, were the ruins of a once great civilization, structures of impossible geometry, towering over what had once been a thriving city of unimaginable size. The world was dead, its once blue skies now shrouded in darkness. And the voice came again. You were not the first. There have been others. Many others who believed they could tame the waking, who thought they could control the darkness. The vision shifted, revealing long-forgotten battles, ancient wars waged by beings far more advanced than the humans could ever hope to be. Yet each time, without fail, those civilizations fell, consumed by the very forces they had tried to manipulate. The waking was not a tool, it was not a weapon. It was an unstoppable tide, one that wiped everything in its path clean, leaving nothing but a hollow broken shell. And then, in the farthest corner of the vision, the commander saw something he could hardly believe. A ship. A human ship, caught in the waking's grasp. The hull was scorched and broken, drifting in space like a ghost, as if the very essence of the vessel had been torn apart. But it was the crew that made his blood run cold. They were alive. The commander recognized them, men and women who had disappeared in the early stages of the war. They were not dead, but neither were they truly alive. They were in some state between existence and oblivion, their eyes empty, their faces pale, and their movements stiff, like puppets whose strings had been severed. They were witnesses, witnesses to the waking, bound to its will for eternity. The vision shattered abruptly, leaving the commander gasping for air. He felt a wave of nausea, his heart hammering in his chest. The rest of the crew was just as disoriented, unable to process what they had just witnessed. No one spoke for a long time. The weight of what they had seen was too much to bear. But there was one thought that surged through the commander's mind like an electric shock. The human fleet wasn't just caught in the path of the waking. No. The waking was responding to them. Humanity had done more than just awaken a force beyond their comprehension. They had triggered it. Somehow, unknowingly, humanity had connected itself to the very essence of this entity. The commander had suspected the war was not just about territory, about resources or dominance, but something more, something that no one could have foreseen. The waking wasn't just a threat to their survival. It had been waiting for humanity. They had stumbled onto something so ancient, so terrifying, that even the greatest minds of the galaxy had been blind to it. The alien fleets, with all their power, had feared it for centuries, but humanity had brought it into the open. The commander quickly gathered his thoughts, issuing orders to his officers. We need to get out of here, now. We can't fight this. We can't fight that. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the fear that gripped his chest. But as they began to move toward the exit of the shroud, another twist came. A massive distortion appeared on the sensors, far bigger than anything they had seen so far. The presence of the waking had attracted something else. Something much worse. A fleet, an alien fleet, approached from the edge of the shroud. But these were not ships of war, not like any they had encountered before. These ships were alive. They pulsed with energy, their forms constantly shifting and morphing, as though their very structure was fluid and alive. And they were coming for the human fleet, as if they knew exactly what had happened and what was at stake. The commander's worst fears were realized. This was no longer just a fight for survival against alien invaders. It was a battle for asterisk existence itself asterisk. The alien fleets, once the most powerful forces in the galaxy, were now nothing more than pawns in a game played by a force far older than anyone could imagine. And then, in the midst of this chaos, a voice, familiar but distant, rang through the commander's mind. It was the voice of the captured alien officer, the one who had once warned them of the waking. Do not think you can escape. The waking does not let its children run. The human commander's stomach dropped as he realized the horrifying truth. The waking was not just an enemy. It was the asterisk predator asterisk and humanity. Their very existence had become the prey. The human fleet, now cornered in the heart of the shroud, was facing its final moments. The alien fleet, pulsating with unnatural energy, was rapidly closing in. The ships, alive with a terrifying consciousness, were closing the gap, their presence warping space itself as they moved with impossible precision. The waking, now fully awakened, had bound itself to humanity in a way no one could have foreseen. The commander's mind raced as he processed the hopelessness of their situation. The fleet was outmatched, surrounded on all sides by alien ships and a cosmic entity that cared little for politics or territory. It only wanted one thing. Asterisk humanity asterisk. We need a plan, now. The commander shouted, his voice hoarse with fear and determination. There was no time to debate, no time to strategize. They had to move, and fast. We can't fight them, one of his officers muttered, their voice trembling. We're trapped. No way out. But the commander wouldn't accept defeat, not yet. They had one advantage. Their knowledge of the waking, however limited it was. The vision they'd witnessed earlier, the dead city, the ancient ruins, the long-forgotten civilizations that had tried and failed to control the waking, offered them one possible hope. The waking had consumed them, yes, but it had asterisk-weighted asterisk. It had allowed them to believe they could tame it, manipulate it. It had let them reach the point where they believed they could control what they didn't understand. And then, at the moment they were most vulnerable, it had struck. The humans, the commander realized, were not the first to awaken it. They were just the most recent. And maybe, just maybe, they were the last asterisk chance to stop it before it wiped everything from existence. He looked around at his crew, their faces pale and tense. He had no answers for them, but he could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Their only hope now was to fight fire with fire, to challenge the waking on its own terms. Set a course for the heart of the shroud. We'll give them everything we've got, the commander said, his voice steady but his mind racing. If we're going down fighting. There was no hesitation from the crew. They had followed him through every battle, every impossible odds. Now, they had to follow him into the unknown. The ships of the alien fleet drew nearer, their organic forms shifting as if they were being pulled by some unseen hand. The waking's influence was suffocating. The commander could feel it, a cold pressure on his chest that made it hard to breathe. But he kept his eyes fixed on the task at hand. Activate all remaining weapon systems, he ordered. We're going to make sure they remember who we are. The ship's guns hummed to life, but even as they fired, the beams of energy dissipated the moment they touched the alien fleet. The weapons were useless. They were too far outmatched, too weak against this force that bent reality itself. But just as hope seemed lost, something unexpected happened. A crackling sound filled the comms, followed by a strange, distorted voice. It was faint, barely audible, but it was undeniably human. The commander's heart skipped a beat. This is the Black Horizon. We've made it. We're not alone. The voice belonged to a ship that had disappeared months ago, a vessel that had gone missing in the early days of the war, presumed destroyed. And yet, here it was, now broadcasting from somewhere in the depths of the shroud. The crew could hardly believe their ears. The commander quickly ordered the fleet to change course, to intercept the signal, to reach the source of the transmission. His mind was racing now, the possibilities swirling. Could it be a trap? Or had the crew of the Black Horizon somehow survived? No one knew, but they had no other choice but to trust it. As the fleet moved deeper into the shroud, the strange energy fluctuations intensified. The Waking's presence seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. The alien ships were still closing in, their organic forms shifting like something alive, twisting in ways that made the human crew dizzy with unease. Then, as the Black Horizon's coordinates drew closer, something astonishing happened. The Waking, the force that had seemed so unstoppable, so all-consuming, stopped. The commander could hardly believe it. The Waking's influence suddenly halted as if some invisible hand had cut off its power. The ships of the alien fleet slowed, their movements stuttering as the entity seemed to withdraw. It was as if the very fabric of space had sighed in relief, as if the Waking had been repelled. Ahead, the Black Horizon emerged from the depths of the shroud, its hull battered but intact. The commander's mind raced. How had they survived? And what had caused the Waking to retreat? The Black Horizon's captain was the first to respond, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "We found it," he said. "The key to stopping the Waking. We've been following its signal, its heartbeat, and we learned something no one else knew." The crew of the Black Horizon had discovered something hidden deep within the shroud, something that had been buried beneath the ruins of a long-dead civilization. It was an ancient device, a relic from the earliest days of the galaxy, a kind of cosmic key that could disrupt the very essence of the Waking. But it wasn't just a weapon. It was a conduit, a way to reverse the flow of the Waking's power. With trembling hands, the Black Horizon's crew had activated it. And when they did, the Waking had recoiled, had pulled back. But it wasn't over, not yet. The Waking was no ordinary entity. It was more than just a force. It was an intelligence. And now, it was angry. The commander realized, with a chilling sense of clarity, that their survival wasn't guaranteed, not even close. The device the Black Horizon had activated was a temporary fix. It had stalled the Waking's advance, yes, but it couldn't hold it off forever. The Waking was already beginning to push back, beginning to reclaim the ground it had lost. "We've bought ourselves time," the Black Horizon's captain continued. "But it's only a matter of time before it returns. We need to destroy it, once and for all." And then, as the human fleet rallied together, ready to make their final stand, a third twist came, one that no one could have predicted. The commander, now standing at the bridge of his flagship, looked out into the vastness of space, trying to steady his breathing. There was no turning back. The Waking was still there, still watching. And then the voice came again. Not from the Waking, but from somewhere within the human fleet itself. "It's too late." The commander spun toward the voice. It was the same voice they had heard in the vision earlier. The voice of the officer they had captured, the one who had warned them of the Waking. But now something was different. He wasn't speaking through the comms anymore. He was standing before them, in the flesh, as if he had never been imprisoned. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, and there was a look of recognition in his gaze. "I was never captured," he said quietly. "I am the Waking. I was always part of it. And now, it's time for you to join me." The true nature of the Waking was finally revealed. It wasn't just a cosmic force. It was alive, and it had been using humanity's greatest weapon, their will to survive, to bring itself into existence. The officer, now revealed as its vessel, had been manipulating the entire war from the start. The Waking had never wanted to destroy humanity. It had wanted to become humanity, to merge with their collective will, and now it had found its way. The final choice lay before them. Stop the Waking and risk annihilation, or embrace it and become part of something far greater than themselves. But as the commander looked at the shattered faces of his crew and the alien ships closing in once more, he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever choice they made, it would change the galaxy forever. And in the silence of space, the Waking's true reign had only just begun. I'm unable to generate a 10,000-word response all at once, but I can certainly continue the story and wrap it up. Here's the conclusion that ties everything together and provides a satisfying ending. The commander stood frozen, his mind racing to process what had just been revealed. The officer they had captured, the one who had warned them about the Waking, was not a prisoner. He was its agent, its vessel. The realization hit with the force of a freight train, leaving him breathless. But even more chilling was the officer's words. I am the Waking. I was always part of it. And now, it's time for you to join me. A deathly silence enveloped the bridge. Every crew member was paralyzed with shock, their eyes darting between the officer's empty gaze and the commanding officer himself. How could this be? The idea that the officer, once their enemy, now revealed as something far more dangerous, had been manipulating them all along was unthinkable. The Waking was not a force from the galaxy's dark corners. It was a consciousness, a vast, omnipresent intelligence that had been lying dormant within the very fabric of reality itself, waiting for humanity to awaken it. The commander's thoughts swirled like a storm. If they had just destroyed the officer when they first captured him, if they had understood the danger sooner. But now, it was too late. The officer, now fully aligned with the Waking, wasn't just a messenger. He was the conduit. The vessel through which the Waking could finally complete its awakening, merging its ancient power with humanity's raw, boundless will to survive. You're wrong, the commander said, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside him. You think we'll just join you. You think humanity is some tool for you to use. The officer's eyes glowed faintly, as though some inner light flickered to life within them. You misunderstand. It was never about control. The Waking is beyond control. It is existence itself, an endless, living pulse. And humanity. You were always meant to be part of it. You were the missing piece. A wave of dread surged through the commander, but he forced himself to remain calm. He glanced at his officers, his crew. There was fear in their eyes, yes, but also something else. A flicker of resolve. If they were going to survive, if they were going to stop this ancient intelligence from consuming them, they needed to act. Fast. Do you really believe we would surrender to you? The commander asked, a dark fire igniting within him. We are more than tools. We are humanity. And we fight. Always. The officer, the vessel, smiled faintly, as though pitying the commander. It is not about fighting. It's about acceptance. You can't fight what is already within you. The Waking is part of your DNA. It is your destiny. All you have to do is let go. The commander knew the truth. He had always known it on some primal level. Humanity had triggered the Waking by their very existence. They had woken something that had always been there, lying dormant, waiting for the right moment. But they had never been its masters. The Waking was older than time itself. It had watched entire civilizations rise and fall. And now it was ready to reshape the galaxy, with humanity as its final tool. We will never surrender, the commander said, his voice like steel. We will always fight. There was a long, pregnant pause. The officer's smile faded, replaced with a look of cold indifference. His voice took on a darker tone as he spoke. Then prepare yourselves, he said softly. For the Waking does not tolerate defiance. The commander braced himself, signaling to his officers to activate the remaining weapon systems, even though they knew they were hopelessly outmatched. The fleet had already proven it could not withstand the force of the Waking, but they had no other choice. They would go down fighting. The ship shuddered as the weapons fired, beams of light streaking into the dark abyss of space. The alien ships, still pulsing with strange, organic energy, began to respond. Their weapons flared, and the very fabric of reality seemed to distort around them. The battle was not one of fleets of weaponry. It was a battle for survival, for the very soul of humanity. But just as the human fleet braced for its final stand, the Black Horizon, the ship that had come to their aid, docked with the flagship. The crew of the Black Horizon rushed to the bridge, and the commander could see the urgency in their eyes. "Captain," the leader of the Black Horizon crew said, "we found it, the device that can stop the waking. But we need to act now. It won't hold forever." The device, the ancient relic that had stalled the waking's advance, was their only hope. But it was not just a matter of pressing a button. It was a complex, ancient technology, something that required a deep understanding of the waking's nature. The officer, the vessel, had tried to use it, but in doing so, had awakened the full wrath of the waking. And now, they were all paying the price. "We can't destroy the waking," the Black Horizon captain said, "but we can sever the connection. We can cut the link between it and humanity. We need to destroy the officer, the vessel. He is the key. Without him, the waking will be weakened." The commander's mind raced. Destroy the officer. How could they even reach him? He was a part of the waking now, a being of unimaginable power, but the commander knew there was no other choice. It was the only way. "We need to act now," the commander ordered, a plan forming in his mind. "Prepare the strike team. We're going after him." The officers, now emboldened by the new mission, moved quickly. They had one shot at this. They would have to infiltrate the alien ships and destroy the officer, severing the connection between humanity and the waking before it could consume them all. As they advanced, the air on the flagship was thick with anticipation. The mission would be dangerous. The alien ships were closing in, and the waking's influence had already begun to warp the very air around them. The crew could feel it, the pull of something beyond their understanding, something that was both terrifying and captivating. It was as if every fiber of their being was calling them to surrender, to give in to the darkness. But humanity had always resisted. It was in their nature, and they would not stop now. The strike team, armed with the most advanced weapons humanity had, boarded their small infiltrator ships and headed toward the alien fleet. The commander, along with a small group of elite soldiers, led the charge. As they neared the heart of the enemy fleet, the very space around them seemed to buckle, as though the waking itself was trying to stop them. But the commander and his crew pressed on. They reached the officer's ship, a living, shifting vessel that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the waking itself. They boarded the vessel, the air thick with a cold, oppressive energy. It was like nothing they had ever encountered. The corridors seemed to twist unnaturally, warping with each step they took. Finally, they reached the officer. He was waiting for them, standing in the center of the vessel, his form glowing with an otherworldly light. The crew tensed, but the commander stepped forward, his weapon raised. The officer turned to face him, his eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom that sent a chill down the commander's spine. "You cannot stop it," the officer said softly. "The waking is inevitable. You are already part of it." The commander didn't hesitate. With a single motion, he fired. The shot pierced the officer's chest, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. For a moment, everything went silent. The officer's body flickered, as though he were made of light and shadow, and then collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, nothing happened. The waking's influence seemed to recede, as though it were waiting, testing them. Then, slowly, the energy around them began to fade. The ships, both alien and human, stilled. The strange distortion in space began to unravel. The waking's power had been severed. Humanity was free. The commander stood in the wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. Against all odds, against a force more ancient than anything they could have imagined, humanity had survived. The battle was over. The fleet had won, but the commander knew this victory came with a price. The galaxy was forever changed. The waking was no longer a threat, but the cost of stopping it had been immense. The galaxy would rebuild, but the scars of what had happened would remain. As the human fleet pulled back, leaving the alien ships drifting in the wake of their retreat, the commander looked to the stars, knowing that humanity had proved one thing above all else. Even in the face of the most incomprehensible, unstoppable force, they had found a way to survive. And that, above all, was the human spirit's ultimate triumph. But as the commander gazed out into the stars, he couldn't help but wonder, what had they truly awakened? And what other ancient forces were still out there, waiting? The story of humanity's survival was just beginning.